The wind over the Ardennes carried the cold bite of a winter that seemed determined to break every man fighting in it. Snow muffled the distant rumble of artillery, turning the world white and silent, too silent for a battlefield. Somewhere beyond the tree line, German armor was regrouping after a night attack that had torn apart an American roadblock. The survivors huddled beside burned-out trucks, rifles frozen to their gloves, waiting for orders that never seemed to come. Among them stood Staff Sergeant William Hartman, a man whose reputation had long been a strange mixture of discipline, recklessness, and the kind of intuition soldiers trusted more than maps. Hartman stared into the fog, rolling through the valley, listening to the faint metallic clatter carried by the wind. It wasn't American. It was heavier, deeper, the growl of something tracked and armored. A tank, maybe several, and the Americans had none left in this sector. During the chaos of the previous night, every Sherman had either retreated or burned where it stood. The platoon was alone, infantry against steel. Hartman lowered his binoculars. "They're coming back," he said quietly, though every man near him already sensed it. The Germans had tested the line, found it weak, and now prepared to punch a hole wide enough to collapse the entire flank. Intelligence had warned about the presence of Panthers, fast, deadly, with armor Sherman guns struggled to penetrate. If one rolled up the road now, there was nothing to stop it, except that something unexpected caught Hartman's eye. Through the drifting fog, a dark shape stood motionless on the ridge. Not moving, not scanning, not firing. A tank, but abandoned. A German Panther. Its engine was silent, its turret angled away, hatch cracked open as if the crew had fled in a panic. Smoke stains along the hull suggested a glancing hit from an American bazooka. Not enough to kill it. Enough to terrify the crew into running, and now it sat there, a steel giant without a master. The idea struck Hartman with the force of a rifle shot. If the Americans couldn't stop the German armor, maybe the Germans could. He walked toward the abandoned Panther with a deliberate calm that made the younger soldiers stare. "Sergeant, what the hell are you doing?" Private Lawson shouted, slipping on the ice as he followed. "That thing's German." "So am I, according to my grandmother," Hartman muttered, never breaking stride. "Stay low. If that tank is working, it's coming with us." They climbed the ridge slowly, expecting at any moment for machine gun fire to rip through the fog. But the forest remained still. When Hartman reached the Panther's hull, he laid a glove on the cold metal. The tank was monstrous up close, sloped armor like the hide of some prehistoric creature, tracks half buried in snow, the 75mm gun pointed into nothingness. Hartman pulled himself onto the turret and peered inside. Empty. The crew had left in a hurry. Maps were scattered across the turret floor. A half-eaten ration tin was frozen to the seat. The smell of smoke lingered, mixed with oil and metal. Every part of the interior felt alive, waiting for a commander bold enough or insane enough to claim it. Lawson looked up at him from below. "You're not seriously thinking—" "Start checking the perimeter," Hartman said. "The Germans won't abandon a Panther for long." He dropped inside the turret, boots clanging against steel. His flashlight flickered across the controls. He didn't need to be an expert. He'd studied German equipment obsessively, believing that knowing the enemy's weapons was the only way to survive them. He traced the ignition system, checked the fuel lines, found the battery. The engine looked intact. He pressed the starter. Nothing happened. He pressed again. A cough, a sputter. Then the engine roared to life, a deep mechanical growl that shook the hull and echoed through the forest. Snow slid from the turret roof. Birds scattered into the sky. The Panther was awake again. Lawson dove behind a rock. "Jesus, Sarge! They're gonna hear that from Berlin!" "Good!" Hartman shouted over the engine. "Let them come! I could use a crew!" Within minutes, 2 more soldiers climbed into the tank, frantic but determined. Corporal Mendoza took the driver's seat after a frantic lesson of guesswork and instinct. Lawson manned the radio equipment, trying to figure out how to listen without broadcasting on German frequencies. Hartman stood in the commander's cupola, scanning the valley as the Panther rumbled forward. Snow churned beneath the tracks. The weight of the machine felt unreal, like riding an iron cathedral through a world made of paper. The gun sight cut through the fog, revealing shadows moving along the tree line. German armor. A column of vehicles approached, half-tracks, infantry, and then the unmistakable silhouette of another Panther pushing through the snow. The Americans had minutes, maybe less.
Hartman's heart pounded, not with fear but with a new, electric clarity. A stolen tank was still a tank, and in the right hands it could tip the balance of a battle. "Driver," he said calmly, "turn us toward the road. Loader, check the breach. If that Panther spots us, we fire first." The stolen tank rolled into position, hiding behind a burned Sherman. Smoke curled around the hull, masking its silhouette. Hartman aimed the gun at the lead German vehicle. His breath fogged his sight. The German infantry marched confidently, unaware that the tank watching them now flew no flag. He waited. Let them come closer. 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 The stolen Panther breathed hot exhaust, engine purring like a predator ready to leap. Hartman whispered now. The shell left the barrel with a violent shudder that traveled through every rivet of the stolen Panther. A flash lit the fog, followed by a thunderous crack that rolled across the frozen valley. The German half-track in the lead column erupted into a fireball, its armor peeling open like the skin of a ruptured fruit. Soldiers scattered in panic, diving into snowbanks, shouting orders drowned out by the blast. For a brief moment, no one understood what had happened. A German Panther firing on Germans? It made no sense. Confusion crawled through the enemy ranks like a shockwave. Officers pointed frantically toward the rage, unsure whether the tank silhouetted in the smoke was friend or foe. Hartman didn't wait for them to figure it out. "Driver, forward 20 meters, he commanded, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "Loader, keep that breech hot." Corporal Mendoza forced the Panther ahead, grinding over charred debris. Snow and mud kicked up beneath the steel tracks as the tank positioned itself at a downward angle, giving Hartman a clean view of the second vehicle in the German column, a Panzer IV trying to swing its turret toward them. On the next mark, Hartman said, leaning into the gun sight, Hold, the Panzer IV's turret stalled, unable to track fast enough on the icy slope. Fire. The Panther's main gun recoiled again. The second shot ripped straight through the Panzer IV's front plate. Fire spewed from the turret hatches as smoke billowed into the forest canopy. German infantry froze in disbelief. None of them had ever trained for a situation like this, an American crew inside a German tank, using their own armor against them. Lawson shouted from the radio station, "Sarge, they're calling for armor support on their network. Sounds like 2 more Panthers inbound. Maybe 3. Hartman nodded. "Good. Well, deal with them before they figure out what we are." He swung the turret toward a cluster of enemies regrouping behind a wrecked truck. Rifle fire pinged uselessly off the Panther's glacis plate. Grenades bounced off the hull like pebbles thrown at a steel gate. "Machine gun," Hartman barked. The bow gun opened up, stitching rounds across the road. German soldiers dove behind trees, some returning fire in desperation, others retreating into the deeper woods where the fog swallowed them whole. But the momentary victory meant nothing. The thunder of engines rumbled from the south, multiple heavy vehicles closing fast. The real enemy armor was here. Mendoza risked a glance up the slope. "Sergeant, if those are Panthers, they're gonna outgun us. They know all the blind spots." "So do I," Hartman said sharply. "Turn us around. We're not meeting them head-on." The driver reversed, treads grinding against ice. The Panther backed into a narrow forest road lined with dense pines branches scraping the hull. Hartman's mind raced. The stolen tank was powerful, but the enemy knew how to kill one. He needed terrain, concealment, and speed, 3 things the Ardennes rarely gave willingly. "Loader, check ammo. How many armor-piercing rounds left?" 8. "Maybe 9, Lawson answered. "That's enough." The forest trembled as the approaching Panthers clattered over frozen earth. Their engines had a deeper tone, 3 cats on the hunt. Hartman breathed slowly. "Driver, off the road. Angle us between those pines. Keep the gun facing the opening." The stolen Panther nestled into a pocket of shadow, camouflaged by snow-covered branches. Steam rose from the muzzle. The turret hummed as Hartman adjusted the elevation, every movement precise. Moments Moments later, the lead German Panther appeared through the fog like a ghost of war. Snow dusted its hull. Its gun swept the tree line, searching for targets. The commander inside shouted orders, unaware that an identical tank crouched 20 yards away, hidden in the darkness. Hartman tracked it through the gun sight. He knew exactly where the Panther's armor was weakest, had memorized the schematics before the war even reached this forest. "Driver," he whispered, "when I fire, move us 5 meters left." Mendoza nodded, sweat freezing on his brow. Hartman exhaled, "Fire." The stolen Panther roared. The shell slammed into the enemy tank, striking just beneath the turret ring. A perfect shot. Sparks erupted. Armor cracked. The enemy turret seized mid-rotation as smoke burst from the hatches. "Move," Hartman shouted. The Panther lunged sideways just as a second German tank fired. A blast tore through the trees where Hartman's tank had been seconds earlier, shredding bark and igniting branches. "Second Panther, bearing 30 degrees, Lawson yelled. Hartman already saw it. The tank advanced cautiously, unsure what had happened to its lead vehicle. "Driver, swing us around." "Loader, app ready." On my mark, the enemy Panther halted, gun traversing toward the wreck of its comrade. Hartman took advantage of the hesitation. "Steady, steady now." The stolen Panther spat fire again. The shot punched through the enemy's lower glacis, ricocheting inside like a burning hammer. Flames shot from the tank's exhaust as the engine compartment detonated. "To Panthers down." But the third was smarter. It didn't charge blindly. It retreated into cover, using the fog and terrain to reposition. Hartman cursed under his breath. A hidden Panther was the deadliest predator in these woods. Radio chatter increasing, Lawson reported. "They know something's wrong. They're calling for infantry support now. We're leaving," Hartman said. "The Germans will swarm this ridge." Mendoza turned the tank deeper into the forest, moving between jagged rocks and pine roots. Branches clawed the hull like skeletal fingers. The Panther's engine groaned but pushed on. For a moment, they thought they'd escaped. Then the third Panther fired. A deafening blast shook the stolen tank. The shot hit high on the turret, deflecting off the sloped armor but slamming hard enough to rattle every bolt. In the crew compartment, Hartman's ears rang. Lawson fell to his knees, clutching the radio set. Turrets jammed. Mendoza yelled. Smoke filled the turret as sparks danced along the ceiling. "Driver, reverse." Hartman shouted, forcing the jammed turret manually. Muscles strained as he fought the steel mechanism. "Loader, check for spalling." A second shot screamed past the hull, gouging a trench in the frozen ground. The German Panther advanced, using the smoke as cover. Hartman grit his teeth. "We're not dying in a stolen tank." Driver ramming speed. "What? Go." The Panther surged forward, engine howling, treads clawing through snow. Through the viewport, the enemy tank loomed larger and larger, gun swinging desperately to track them. At the last second, the German commander realized what was happening. Too late. The stolen Panther smashed into the enemy's side, metal shrieking, both tanks sliding across the icy earth. Hartman grabbed the side handles and shouted, "Loader he." When the turret freeze fire, the jam finally cracked loose. The turret swung a few precious inches just enough. The shell detonated against the enemy hull. Silence followed. Then fire. The German Panther burned as Hartman's tank backed away, smoke curling around the shattered ridge. 3 Panthers destroyed. 1 stolen tank still alive. Hartman wiped soot from his face. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we're not done yet. The Germans will think a rogue Panther crew has gone insane. Let's make sure they keep thinking that." The crew exchanged exhausted, incredulous smiles as the Panther rolled deeper into the frozen forest, still hunting, still surviving, still defying every rule of the war. The forest swallowed the Panther as dawn crept over the Ardennes, its pale light filtering through skeletal branches glazed in frost. Inside the tank, the air smelled of cordite, sweat, and burning insulation. Every man felt the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones, yet no one dared relax. The Germans would not ignore the slaughter of 3 Panthers. Retaliation was guaranteed. Hartman studied the terrain through the streaked gun sight. The woods were thick, but not impenetrable. Frozen ravines cut through the hills like scars. Abandoned foxholes dotted the clearing, remnants of earlier skirmishes between American infantry and German advance units. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the front lines twisted like a wounded serpent, confused and chaotic after days of winter combat. "Sergeant," Mendoza said quietly, "we're low on fuel." fuel. Maybe half a tank left, and the engine's been knocking since that last hit. It will hold, Hartman replied. He didn't entirely believe it, but he needed his men focused. We didn't steal this beast to park it and freeze. Lawson wiped his glasses with a trembling hand. Radio traffic is going wild. Germans think there's a rogue Panther platoon operating behind their lines. Some believe it's deserters. Others think it's an American unit using captured armor. Hartman smirked. Let's make the truth even harder to guess. He ordered the tank toward a narrow ravine that snaked downhill toward a village, whose name had been erased from most maps. Schneidor. Smoke rose from chimneys, lazy and indifferent to the war clawing at its edges. Hartman's battalion had been pinned somewhere west of the village the previous day. If he could break through with the Panther and strike German supply lines, it might relieve pressure on the American front. But the snow muffled everything. The forest was too quiet. As they approached the ravine, movement flickered through the trees, shadows slipping between trunks. Barely perceptible. Hartman tapped the periscope. Whole. Infantry in the woods. Mendoza stopped the Panther. The crew listened, boots crunching snow. Distant commands in German. A patrol. Close. Hartman lowered his voice. We let them pass. No shots. The Panther sat motionless, steam drifting from its exhaust like breath from a hibernating beast. German soldiers trudged along a path only 30 yards away, rifles slung carelessly, unaware that death waited behind a veil of frost-covered branches. One soldier paused, squinting toward the tree line. Hartman's hand tightened on the turret grip. A moment stretched into eternity. Then the soldier shrugged and rejoined his patrol. The Panther remained still until the last footstep faded. Mendoza exhaled. Sergeant, if they'd seen us, they didn't. Hartman interrupted. Moo. They descended the ravine, treads grinding over frozen stones. At the bottom lay a wooden bridge spanning a narrow river, or what was left of the bridge. Heavy armor tracks and shell craters had reduced it to a splintered skeleton that sagged dangerously over the rushing water. We're not crossing that, Lawson said. We don't need to, Hartman replied. We're turning the ravine into an ambush site. The crew worked quickly. They positioned the Panther between two boulders, its front angled toward the only passable path. Snow concealed the hull. Branches were dragged over the turret like camouflage netting. They waited. War has a strange way of stretching time. Minutes become hours. Silence becomes a threat. Even the wind feels hostile. The men sat in cramped stillness. The only sound the occasional drip of melted frost tapping the hull. Then, faintly, they heard it. A diesel engine, slow, heavy. A German supply convoy. 3 trucks, possibly more. Their engines echoed down the ravine, grinding through ice. A convoy meant ammunition, fuel, rations, everything the German front desperately needed. Loader, Hartman ordered. Driver, stay cold until the lead truck passes the bridge. The first truck rolled into view, headlights dimmed, frost painting its canvas sides. Men huddled in the back beneath blankets, rifles resting between their knees. Hartman waited. The second truck arrived, then a third. Now the Panther erupted from the snow like a predator leaping from underbrush. Its engine thundered as the turret swung toward the center truck. Fire. The shell exploded beneath the chassis, flipping the truck onto its side. Ammunition crates erupted outward like shrapnel. The second truck slammed into the first, soldiers tumbling out in confusion. The third tried to reverse, fishtailing wildly. Machine gun fire tore through the ravine. German troops dove behind rocks, shouting, scrambling for cover, but the Panther owned the narrow pass. Another shot blasted the third truck, shredding its engine block. Flames spread across the wreckage, illuminating the ravine in violent oranges and yellows. Some soldiers fled uphill. Others fired into the smoke, but their bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the Panther's armor. Then a scream from Lawson. Tank, East Ridge. Hartman whipped the turret toward the slope. A Stuggy emerged from the fog, its low silhouette unmistakable, gun already aimed. Driver, reverse. Loader, app. The Stug fired first. The world shook. The shell struck the Panther's upper hull, ripping away chunks of camouflage, showering the tank with splinters. The impact nearly lifted the left tread. Mendoza fought the controls. She's sliding. Hold her steady, Hartman yelled. The Stug crept forward for a killing shot. Hartman aimed. The Stug's armor was thick in the front but weaker along the lower plate. Steady, steady fire. The shell slammed into the Stug's lower bow. For a moment, nothing happened, then flames burst from the commander's hatch. The vehicle shuddered as secondary explosions tore through its interior. But the victory came with a cost. Smoke seeped into the Panther's cabin. Mendoza coughed violently. Something was burning: oil, wiring, insulation. Hartman lifted the hatch, frigid wind slashing his face. He scanned the ridgeline. More enemy troops regrouping. A squad of grenadiers pushing through the trees, and beyond them a panzer rolling into position. "We're leaving," Hartman ordered. "Driver, take us uphill. Fast." The Panther clawed its way up the ravine slope, treads slipping but gripping enough to ascend. Small arms fire pattered across the rear armor. A grenade bounced off the turret and exploded harmlessly against a tree. The Panzer fired. The shell missed by inches, slamming into a boulder and showering the tank with shards of stone. "Faster!" Hartman shouted. Mendoza pushed the engine harder, the Panther roaring as it burst through the tree line and onto an open field blanketed in snow. They were exposed now but alive. The Panzer barreled after them, turret swiveling. Hartman spun his own turret, breath fogging the sight. "Loader, last app, make it count." Lawson slammed the final armor-piercing round into the breach. The enemy tank closed the distance. Hartman whispered to himself, "Come on, just a little more." He fired. The shell struck the Panzer dead center. The turret buckled, flames erupting from the seams. The tank ground to a halt, swallowed by black smoke. Then silence. Only the wind remained. Inside the Panther, the crew stared at each other, stunned. Through exhaustion, fear, and chaos, they had survived again. But Hartman knew it wasn't over. "Mendoza," he said quietly, "get us to Schneidorf. There's still a war to win." The Panther rumbled forward, battered and bruised, but still fighting, still defying the enemy. Still writing a legend no one would believe until long after the snow melted from the Ardennes. And somewhere in those white hills, Hartman realized something. They were no longer just a tank crew. They were the most dangerous ghost the German army had ever created. Snow fell softly over the Ardennes as the Panther crawled toward Schneidorf, its engine rumbling like an exhausted giant. Inside, the 4 men sat in a silence shaped not by fear, but by the strange electricity that comes after surviving something impossible. Their uniforms were burned, their faces blackened by soot. Their nerves stretched thin enough to tear. And yet, in spite of everything, they were alive, carried forward by a machine they were never meant to command. Dawn broke slowly across the hills, painting the frozen world in pale gold. Through the periscope, Hartman saw the outlines of Schneidorf, a cluster of stone houses, half deserted, half occupied by German rear units who believed the front was miles away. Smoke drifted from chimneys. A horse stood tethered beside a barn. A lonely German sentry stomped his feet against the coal, unaware that a captured Panther was stalking the outskirts of his village. For a moment, Hartman let the tank idle. He watched the stillness of Schneidorf and wondered how many times the war had devoured places just like this. Nameless villages swallowed by the front line and forgotten as soon as the smoke cleared. He thought of the convoy they'd destroyed in the ravine, the Stuggy, the Panzer, the patrol that had passed within yards of them. He thought of the men who were still out there fighting, freezing, trying to survive another day. And then he thought of home, of warmth, of normalcy, of a world without the sound of artillery rolling over the hills. Mendoza broke the silence. "Sergeant, about Schneidorf. We charging straight through?" Hartman took one last look at the village, then lowered the periscope. "No, not unless they force us. Our job isn't to burn towns. It's to break lines. And if they don't get the memo," Lawson muttered. Hartman allowed himself a tired smile. "Then we remind them." The Panther rolled forward again, slow but deliberate. They skirted the tree line, using the forest as cover. From their vantage point, they could see German trucks parked near the village square, crates stacked high beside them, ammunition depot, fuel drums, maybe even medical supplies, enough to support an entire battalion for another push west. Destroying it wouldn't win the war, but it could save American lives. Hartman studied the layout, mentally charting the angles. The Panther's last rounds could ignite the fuel. The machine guns could tear through the depot's guard positions, and the chaos that followed, explosions, panic, confusion, would stall German plans for hours, maybe longer. Sergeant Mendoza whispered, "We're running on prayers and fumes. If we fire up that whole village, we might not have enough fuel left to get out." Hartman didn't answer immediately. He watched two German officers walk between the trucks, clipboard in hand. He saw a group of soldiers smoking beneath a broken archway, rifles hanging loosely from tired hands. None of them sensed the danger crouched in the woods. Hartman finally spoke. "If we leave that depot standing, it'll be American boys paying the price tomorrow, not them." Lawson swallowed hard. "Then let's make it count." The decision was made. Hartman ordered Mendoza to position the tank at the edge of the clearing. The Panther settled into place like a predator lowering itself before the pounce. Heat from the engine shimmered in the air. The men braced themselves. The last rounds were loaded. The final charge of their stolen war machine was about to begin. Hartman breathed in the cold morning air and gave one last command. "Light it up." The Panther roared. Its first shell hit the fuel drums, detonating them in a fireball that punched the sky. The explosion shattered windows across the village. Trucks burst into flames. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting over the roar. The second shell tore through the ammunition crates, igniting a chain reaction of violent blasts. The third ripped into a stone outbuilding, sending debris hurtling across the square. Within seconds, Schneidorf was engulfed in chaos. German soldiers scrambled, rifles raised, searching for an enemy they could not see. Barracks caught fire. Smoke smothered the rooftops. Flames climbed the walls like hungry beasts. And then, just as quickly, the Panther vanished back into the forest, swallowed by branches and drifting snow. No one chased it. Most never even understood what had happened. Hours later, as Hartman and his crew limped toward friendly lines, the smoke from Schneidorf still rose behind them, a dark column stretching into the winter sky, marking the path of a legend already taking shape. They were for men in a stolen tank, outnumbered, outgunned, running on hope and steel. But in that frozen forest, surrounded by enemies, they became something else entirely, a ghost that refused to die. And somewhere ahead, beyond the frostbitten hills and shattered tree lines, the war waited, ready for the next chapter in a story no one would believe, until long after the guns finally fell silent.